There's something unsettling about staying in an old hotel. By day, its history feels charming, the creaking floors, the heavy doors, the faded portraits on the walls. But when the lights go out and the halls fall silent, those same things begin to feel different, darker. Many guests have checked in expecting a quiet night's rest, only to leave with stories they can never forget. Shadows in the hallway, whispers behind locked doors, and figures that vanish the moment you blink. Tonight, we'll step inside 5 UK hotels where fear has lived for centuries, and so have their ghosts. If you enjoy exploring the darkest haunted places with me, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss a new story. 1. The Langham Hotel, London. I never thought I would believe in ghosts, but one night at the Langham Hotel in London changed everything. The hotel looked beautiful when I first walked in, grand chandeliers, polished floors, and a silence that felt a little too heavy for such a busy city. I had checked into room 333, not knowing its reputation. To me, it was just another elegant London hotel room. The evening started peacefully. I placed my bag near the bed and admired the Victorian-style furniture. The air smelled faintly of old wood mixed with lavender, but there was something else I couldn't quite describe, a heaviness, like the room itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, I was reading by the bedside lamp when the light began to flicker. At first, I thought it was just faulty wiring, but then the air grew colder, sharp enough to sting my skin. My heartbeat quickened. I remember pulling the blanket closer when I noticed movement near the window. A man was standing there. He looked pale, dressed in what seemed like an old-fashioned military uniform. His eyes were hollow, dark, and fixed directly on me. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind screamed to run, but my body froze. I wanted to believe it was just a shadow, but he started walking slowly toward the bed. The closer he came, the more unbearable the cold became. My breath turned white in the air as if I had stepped into a freezer. He stopped only a few feet away from me. His lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear, and then, without warning, his face twisted into an expression of deep sorrow, so heavy that it felt like it was pressing down on my chest. I panicked. I fumbled for the lamp switch, and as the light blinked back on, he was gone. The room was empty again. The silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I told the receptionist what had happened. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she gave a small, knowing smile and said, "You were in room 333. Many guests have seen him there." She explained that the ghost was believed to be a German prince who had thrown himself out of that very window over a century ago. Even now, when I think back to that night, I can still feel the icy air on my skin and the weight of those sorrowful eyes. The Langham Hotel may look like a place of luxury, but behind its polished walls, it hides stories that guests like me will never forget. 2. The Skirrid Mountain Inn, Wales. I arrived at the Skirrid Mountain Inn just before sunset. From the outside, it looked like a cozy countryside pub, its old wooden beams and stone walls glowing warmly under the fading light. But I had already read enough about its dark history. Centuries ago, criminals were hanged here, their bodies swaying from the beams above. As I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the air felt heavier than any pub I'd ever walked into. The bartender welcomed me with a smile, but behind that smile, there was something else, almost as if he knew I would feel it too. After a drink, I carried my bag upstairs to my room. The staircase creaked under my weight, and for a second, I felt like someone else was following right behind me. When I turned, the stairs were empty. My room was small but carried that undeniable weight of age. The air smelled of damp wood and smoke from a long-gone fire. That night, as the wind whistled through the cracks, I lay in bed trying to sleep. That's when it began. The room temperature dropped suddenly, sharp enough to make me shiver under the blanket. Then I heard it, a faint rope creaking above my head, like wood straining under a heavy weight. I froze. My eyes traced the ceiling, but there was nothing hanging there. Yet the sound grew louder, and soon I could swear I heard feet kicking, struggling, as though someone was fighting for breath. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I sat up in bed, clutching the sheets, whispering to myself that it wasn't real. But then, in the corner of the room, a shadow appeared. It wasn't mine. It was longer, taller, its head tilted unnaturally to one side as though a rope was still around its neck. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my throat dry. I wanted to scream, but not a sound left my mouth. The figure swayed once, twice, then drifted closer. The smell hit me first, a sharp, earthy stench, like damp rope mixed with sweat. That's when I stumbled toward the door, flinging it open. In the hallway, I caught my breath. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Behind me, the door slowly shut on its own with a soft click. I didn't dare go back in. I spent the rest of the night downstairs, near the fireplace, refusing to be alone. The next morning, when I told the bartender what had happened, he simply nodded and said quietly, "Many guests leave without finishing their stay. You're not the first to hear the rope." Even today, when I close my eyes, I can still hear that awful creaking sound above me. Like the ghosts of the hanged will never stop swaying in the shadows of the Skirrid Mountain Inn. 3. The Jamaica Inn, Cornwall. The night I stayed at the Jamaica Inn, the Cornish moors were covered in thick fog. Driving up to the old inn felt like stepping back in time. The heavy stone walls stood against the mist like a fortress, but there was something unsettling about the silence that wrapped around it. I had read about smugglers and ghost stories connected to this place, but nothing could prepare me for what I was about to feel inside. The pub downstairs was warm and full of chatter, but as soon as I walked upstairs to my room, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew still, as if the walls themselves were holding a secret. My room had uneven wooden floors and a small window that looked out over the moors. I dropped my bag on the chair and laughed at myself for feeling uneasy. "It's just an old inn," I whispered. But that night, as the clock edged past midnight, the real Jamaica Inn showed itself. I was lying in bed when I heard the first sound. A man's voice, low and muffled, as though someone was whispering right outside the door. I sat up, straining my ears, but the hallway was silent. I convinced myself it was just other guests and lay back down. Minutes later, footsteps echoed across the corridor. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. I forced myself to open the door, but the hallway was empty. Not a soul in sight. My heart pounded harder now, and I returned to bed, leaving the lamp on this time. That's when it happened, the sound of boots crossing my room. The floorboards creaked with weight, though no one was visible. My skin prickled as the air turned colder. Then, from the corner near the fireplace, I heard it clearly, a man's voice, deep and slurred, muttering words I couldn't understand. I felt like I was intruding on something that wasn't meant for the living. The fear peaked when I caught a glimpse in the mirror. For a second, just a second, I saw the reflection of a man in a long coat and tricorn hat, his face shadowed but his eyes fixed on me. When I spun around, there was nothing there, only the empty corner. Shaking, I grabbed my bag and rushed downstairs. The inn was silent now, the pub closed, the fire dying. I sat near the embers until morning, too afraid to return upstairs. When I told the staff about my night, one of them simply nodded and said, "You've met one of the old smugglers. They never really left." Even now, whenever I think about that night, I can still hear those boots on the floorboards and that drunken whisper curling through the silence of the Jamaica Inn. For the George Hotel, Crawley, West Sussex. When I first checked into the George Hotel in Crawley, I thought it was charming, timber-framed walls, low ceilings, and a history that stretched back centuries. It felt more like stepping into a piece of living history than just another hotel stay. The staff were welcoming, but I noticed something strange when they handed me the key. The receptionist paused for a second, glanced at the room number, then gave me a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't think much of it at the time. That evening, after dinner, I went up to my room. The hallways were narrow, dimly lit, and the old carpets muffled every step. My room smelled faintly of lavender polish and old wood, the kind of scent you'd expect in a place with such history. I left the lamp on and tried to settle into bed, but something about the silence felt too deep, like the whole building was holding its breath. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Slow, steady, deliberate. At first, I thought it was another guest returning to their room, but the steps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for a knock. Nothing came. I finally gathered the courage to open the door. The hallway was empty, stretching both ways in silence. I shook my head, embarrassed at myself, and returned to bed. But that's when I saw her. Standing by the window was a figure dressed in white. A woman. She wore what looked like a nun's habit, the veil flowing down her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and fixed on something beyond me, as if I wasn't even there. My blood ran cold. I wanted to move, to speak, to do anything, but I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, my mouth dry. The figure slowly turned her head toward me, and for a split second, I felt an overwhelming wave of sadness, so heavy it was almost suffocating. Then, just as suddenly, she vanished into thin air. I sat there, trembling, the silence pressing in around me. It wasn't a dream. I hadn't imagined it. The air still felt colder where she had stood, and the faint scent of incense lingered in the room. The next morning, when I nervously asked a staff member about it, she lowered her voice and said, "You saw the nun, didn't you? She's been wandering here for centuries. Some say she's searching for something she lost long ago." I left the George Hotel that day with my bag in hand and a chill that still clung to my skin. Even now, when I think of that hollow gaze, I know I didn't just see a story, I lived it. 5. The Adelphi Hotel, Liverpool. When I first stepped into the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool, I felt like I had walked into another era. The grand staircase, the marble floors, and the high ceilings gave it the look of faded royalty. But under all that elegance, there was something else, a weight in the air, like the walls had seen too much and were keeping their secrets. My room was on the 4th floor. I remember taking the lift up that evening, its brass doors polished but worn with age. The ride was smooth, almost too quiet. I noticed the buttons flickering faintly as if the lift had a life of its own. I laughed it off at the time, but later that night, I realized it wasn't a joke. It was close to 1 a.m. when I returned from a walk and stepped into the lobby. The place was almost empty except for the night staff. The lift doors slid open by themselves, though no one had pressed the button. Curious, I stepped inside. Halfway up, the lift stopped. The lights dimmed, and the air turned icy cold. I pressed the button again, but the lift didn't move. Then I heard it, whispers. Faint, overlapping voices, like a crowd talking from a distance. My chest tightened. I looked around, but I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a reflection in the mirrored panel. A man in an old-fashioned suit stood right behind me, his face pale, his eyes sunken, staring straight ahead. My blood ran cold. I spun around, but the lift was empty. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic, and then the lift jolted violently, the lights flickering. I hit the emergency button again and again, praying the doors would open. Finally, with a sharp clang, the lift shuddered and stopped at my floor. The doors slid open slowly, as if reluctant to let me out. I stumbled into the hallway, my legs shaking. Behind me, the lift doors closed, and I heard it continue moving on its own, up and down, with no one inside. The next morning, I asked one of the older staff members if the lift often malfunctioned. He gave me a knowing look and said, "People have seen things in there. Some say it's the ghost of a man who died here years ago. That lift has never been quiet since. Even now, whenever I hear the metallic sound of old lift doors, I feel that same chill run down my spine, and I remember the whispers of the Adelphi Hotel."